Hi everyone, and welcome to today's episode of Shattering Glass and Heels. My guest today is Gillian Hayes, Vice Provost for Graduate Education and Dean of the Graduate Division at UC Irvine. I am so excited about this conversation as Gillian is not just one of my dear friends, but I am honored to serve on her Dean's Leadership Council. Let's welcome Gillian in true UC Irvine fashion. Zot, zot, zot. Hi, everyone. Thanks for tuning in to this episode of Shattering Glass and Heels. I am so excited about my next guest, Gillian Hayes, who's the Vice Provost for Graduate Education and the Dean of the Graduate Division at UC Irvine. I guess you say zot, 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 right?
That's right. You got it. Zot,
Zot,
zot, zot.
I got it right. Zot, zot, zot. And right next to me is my sidekick, Peter. So for this only special edition of the podcast. So, hey, Gillian, how are you doing?
I'm doing great. Better because I'm chatting with you today. It's always a good day when I get to hang out with you.
I know. It's always a great day when I get to hang out with you as well. So I am super excited to talk to you. First of all, thank you so much for your support with the book and everything. I think what I love so much about our relationship from like day one, it's like always just about lifting each other. And like you completely adopted me. You're like, oh, great, I'm adopting him. Like, please adopt me.
Yeah.
I'm like, never question any adventure that you brought me through. And it's just been always really great and really super excited about what you and I can build together. And I'm so honored to be part of your leadership council as well and really excited to be part of the UCI community. So thank you.
And we love having you.
Thank you. And I'm so excited about this conversation because, gosh, I think lots of drinks and dinners and this is, you and I can keep going on and on and on. And I think I'm really excited about the fact that like we get to record this, we get to share our stories with everyone else and kind of amplify the conversation around us. But so I want to start a little about you. Just tell the audience about your background. I know that you started in like consulting and you're a woman in tech and now in academia. So maybe tell us a little bit about that and some of the challenges, opportunities, and advantages that you've had throughout your career or, that pathway.
Yeah, I'm happy to. And I actually just realized, I don't know if I ever even have told you how I became a computer scientist because it's a little bit funny. And for all the young women out there who are like, not sure if they want to go down this path, just know that it's totally fine. And I fell backwards into it. And so let me explain what I mean by that. I started out as an undergrad. I was a double major in molecular biology and math. And I thought, this was the 90s and AIDS was like the thing everyone was worried about. And I knew that I was pretty good at science. And so I thought, I'm going to cure AIDS. This was like my thing that I, big aspirations in a young mind. And I was fortunate enough to go work at the NIH when I was in college. And I actually worked for, at the time, a not as well-known scientist, Tony Fauci, who ran the AIDS lab at the NIH at the time. And now everyone thinks of him as the COVID guy. But at the time, he was an HIV researcher. And I actually had a really fantastic female mentor there, and she did everything she could to turn me into a biologist. And I was terrible at it. Like, I can't even tell you, my cultures all grew mold. I was so depressed all the time. I found it so tedious. Like it's just like pipetting all day long. And it was a mess. So when I went back to college in the fall, this was the fall of my junior year, which is a little bit late to be changing majors. I was like, I can't be a biologist. This is terrible. And I flipped through the course catalog. So of course, back then you had a paper catalog and realized that if I did any double major on campus, other than computer science with my math major, I was going to have to take an extra semester. And I was fortunate enough that my parents were paying for college and Vanderbilt's very expensive and they were not going to pay for an extra semester. If I did only the math major, I would graduate a semester early and Vanderbilt didn't, at the time at least, let you stay. And I really loved college and I was having fun. So I became a computer scientist because it was literally the only second major that would make me be able to graduate at the right amount of time.
That's an amazing story. I can relate to that. So I went to Oberlin and I was told, do not throw all your eggs in one basket in a music thing. So like I was a voice major and a neuroscience major at the start. Then I had to take biology 101. And when the professor was literally handing me a bucket when I walked in the lab because we were doing dissections, knowing that I was probably going to upchuck, like, that was when I knew. I was like, I love biology from a theory perspective. When I lived in Australia, it was like, marine biology was great, but like actual biology, I was like, I couldn't stomach it. So like, I had to change my major.
Yeah. And it's important.
Biology, so I can't go down neuroscience. So
yeah.
Yeah.
I meet so many students who are like, oh my gosh, I'm so miserable. And I say to them, if you're miserable, you should really switch fields because, and I'm sure you had the same experience. I think about like, what is a voice major? That's an enormous commitment. That's so much time and effort. That's so difficult, but you probably loved it.
Yeah.
That's how I felt when I switched into CS. I was taking all these algorithms classes that everyone complained about. And I was like, this is great. This is so fun. This is so interesting.
Yeah, I'm making deals with myself. Okay, 3 more chapters of abnormal psych, and then you can practice. I'm like, what?
Yeah.
Deal at all.
That's not a deal. You got to do what you love. But yeah, and then I wound up at Deloitte like every other good Vanderbilt kid who had no clue what they wanted to do with their career. And learned an absolute enormous amount about how the world works, about how to run meetings, to how to be a grown-up, all of those kinds of things. And wound up, going back to do a PhD because honestly, I just kind of liked learning and I always thought that I would, and wound up a computer scientist because it seemed interesting at the time and Georgia Tech let me in and I already lived in Atlanta. And so it was easy. And, there's so many times I look back in my career and I think people probably think there was some strategy here and there actually wasn't. There was like following what you love and what you're interested in and what you're good at. I actually think that's something that you and I have in common in a lot of ways.
Yeah. Just blindly just go in what we love and, we'll figure out the career later. Like it just kind of falls into place.
Exactly.
But I think actually that's where I want to go in. So like computer science, like what did you want to do with that? Like, okay, you're not going to cure AIDS, you're going to computer science.
Yeah. So then I went like the whole other direction for a little bit. So I went into biology with a really applied idea. I wanted to do this important clinical medical thing. But what I found was like, I actually really loved like the nerdy, algorithms and the mathy part. I was a math major too. So then I thought I was going to be a theoretician, which in computer science basically means lots of math. And went thinking that's what I'm going to do with my life. And in fact, didn't go to grad school right after undergrad because I wasn't sure if I wanted a PhD in math or a PhD in CS. It was actually my time in consulting that made me realize, what's actually really interesting and hard about computers is not the computers, it's the people using the computers and all of the ways in which, most of our computing systems are just deeply unusable and they're not enjoyable. They don't bring you the pleasure that they should. And that's how I sort of went into more human computer interaction user experience. It was time in consulting realizing when we'd write the code that just ran in the back end and batch stuff, everything was great. As soon as we wrote code that people had to interact with, like nothing worked right. Everything was breaking all the time because people do wacky things that you don't necessarily expect. And that's when I decided that's the cool part of what's happening in computing.
That's really cool. So then, okay, computing dreams to academia. Like what was that step and that leap and that change?
That is a great question. And if there's any grad students out there listening to this podcast, just know, like, you don't have to know exactly what your path is going to be. So I'm in a field, right, where people get PhDs and lots of them go to industry or they go, work for government agencies or they go to academia. And when I first started, I was absolutely sure that I was going to go work at a small college somewhere. Like I wanted to be at a teeny tiny, adorable liberal arts school that like looks like college and professors wear like tweed jackets. And that's what I was sure I was going to do. And then I went and interned at Intel and at IBM and like experienced industry research. And I was like, oh, this is super cool. I'm definitely going into industry. And by the end, I didn't do either of those things. I wound up at a big research university, which, kind of in some ways combines the best of both worlds. I get to do lots of research, but I also get to spend time with students. But, I just sort of followed along and tried to figure out what was what. And when I did my job hunt, I applied super broadly to industry jobs, academic jobs, all kinds of things. And I thought for sure I was not coming to this like UCI. What is that place even? Who's ever heard of Irvine? I didn't know I was such an East Coaster. I knew some of the top researchers in my field were here, but that's all I knew. And we came to visit, and my husband and I were both just like, oh, this place is great. Like, why would anyone want to live anywhere but here? It's amazing. And the university is great, and it's so interdisciplinary. And, you know, I've been here for, oh my God, 17 years now, which is wild to think about.
That's amazing. I mean, women in tech and in academia, that's not an easy journey. I'm sure you've had some challenges along the way. Can you share with us a little bit of what those challenges were and how you really broke through some of those challenges as a woman in tech? And by the way, for everyone that's listening to this, like my first impression of Gillian, and everyone says this, is like, how are you computer science and an academic with so much personality?
We are very social people. Most computer scientists are lovely. No, you know, it's interesting. So when I was a math major only, I was the only woman in any of my major classes that was not also a double major in education. So that was one of the things at Vanderbilt. If you're an education major, you have to double major in something else so you can become a teacher of. And the only other women were all education majors. They're all planning on becoming math teachers. When I expanded to computer science, there were actually a few more women, but not by much, and almost all international. And I can remember, you know, this was almost 25 years ago now, thinking, this has got to change. Like, this is bananas. And in fact, if you look at the early days of computing, it was largely women because that's who knew how to type. And so, like, what happened when we went from all these women programmers to no women programmers? And I thought, well, this is just a weird blip. This will change. And it's changed a little, but not really. And when I was younger, I did a lot of work with, you know, girl-focused kinds of programs, because there was a lot of research at the time that basically middle school is when it all falls apart. And that resonated with me. I had written code on my old Apple IIe when I was in elementary school. And then somewhere in middle school, people told me like, well, girls don't do that. And that's not cool. You can go into like bio, but you can't do CS or engineering. And so I really tried to work on that. Now that I'm a little bit more senior and I can look around and I can see where a lot of the problems are really structural and cultural, I've stopped feeling like it's okay to tell young girls, just persist, just be better, just be smarter, just ignore the boys. That doesn't feel okay to me anymore. So now I'm really trying to work on fixing our structures. So how do we change academic leadership? How do we change our courses? How do we change when I do consulting? How do we change big companies, startup culture to make it more of a pull for girls instead of just trying to shove them through a pretty toxic system?
Love that. And as you've seen this throughout the years, even at UC Irvine, are you starting to see an uptick of a lot of women really going into disciplines of STEM disciplines, particularly in computer science?
It's interesting. The stats are a little worrisome. If you look in anywhere in STEM, for the most part, chemistry, bio, these kinds of places, women have pretty much reached parity in most of our undergrad majors, or even there's more women often. I mean, in general, there's more women in college now. For about 10 years or so, women have out-earned PhDs to men. So that's changing universally. Where we still, computer science, for a variety of reasons, we are still quite behind. So we have some work to do. And there's a lot of really smart, wonderful people that are trying to figure this out, like what's actually going on here, and why is this happening when we see so many changes so many other places. The other thing that's sort of fascinating is that even though women are out earning PhDs than men, they are not generally getting more. They're not more of them are tenured, more of them in academic leadership positions, et cetera. Those numbers are still quite small. And so we're kind of trying to figure that out. I'm told, and you will know better than I do, that this looks very similar to the sort of accounting and big tech outside of academia world where women are really academically achieving and then they're not sort of progressing into management the way that we would expect.
Yeah, no, and I think that that's part of it that's a little scary, right? For me, like going up in the management ladder, I think, talked a lot about it in the book. For Asian women, it's 80% of us that drop off. And it's just the lack of representation, the lack of like just people pounding the table for executive leadership that are women in these male dominated fields, particularly in tech. I think what's also interesting, right? Accenture wrote a study a couple years ago when I was there, tenure, that talked a lot about what's going to close the gender pay gap is going to be digital and digital fluency. And it's not just in the US, but across the world. And I think the study suggested that by 2030, these efforts could lead to about 35% reduction in the pay gap, and resulting in like 3.9 trillion increase in women's income across the world. And I know Girls Who Code also believe in that, and that's where they're really kind of investing younger in women who are coding. But it's interesting to see, like, again, we have them in the more junior level positions. What is it going to take to continue to shatter that glass ceiling for people like us, who are, trying to continue to climb and trying to continue to pull other women there? But it's so fascinating to see kind of like where the drop off is. Is it, in academia, at what point within that chain, in the system does it drop off? And I think that there's still a lot of work to do. And just, I get your UC Irvine stats, but, you have a good perspective within academia and interesting. Is that unique to UCI, or is that unique across like academia as well?
Yeah, Irvine's an interesting place, right? The UC in general, we have for quite a long time had really good partner hire programs at the faculty level on our campuses. So essentially, if you want to hire a faculty member and they have a partner that they need to bring with them, there's a lot of support for doing that, sort of ways to do that. And then UCI in particular is interesting because we're in an incredibly expensive real estate market, but we have a major housing program for faculty, and for staff, but mostly faculty. And so I think that combination has been really helpful in bringing women in, and we do lots of equity reviews and all kinds of things. But I was actually looking up some data because I have these sort of very positive feelings about academia in general and feel like we're, especially at public universities, we're really trying to sort of lead the way and bringing in underrepresented groups and women and so on. And so I'm like, oh, I wonder what the pay gap is currently in American universities. So I'm just Googling around and found a bunch of studies done in the last couple of years that are still really worrisome. So, it's still the case that across American universities, women professors make like 82% of what their colleagues who are men earn, even after you adjust for things like discipline. So it is the case that women faculty tend to be more prevalent in disciplines that are less well paid. So humanities, arts, and so on. But even once you account for discipline, there's still these challenges. And that was a little bit worrisome. I mean, 82% is better than the norm. So academia is doing better, but we have places to go. But what really worried me as a woman leader, who, to be clear, I feel super supported in my role, but there was a study done by the American Association of University Women just a couple of years ago at 130 of the major research universities. So that's sort of R1 in the nerdy Carnegie speak. Only 22% were either president or chancellor or system head. And 6 of those universities had at least 3 women, but 60 of 130 had never had a woman president in the history of their university. So you sort of look at these and you're like, we're still struggling at that executive position, which again, I think really mirrors what's happening in the private sector. And I'm not quite sure how we overcome that.
Yeah, I mean, it's fascinating because there are definitely parallels. They're not. It's parallels, and they're the same. They're very, very similar, even though they're very different industries. And actually, academia has probably been more in the lens in the country, right? With all the different presidents that were just recently let go, and they were all women and diverse women. that's, I think, a little shocking. And then you've got this kind of statistic. I mean, is that systemic, or what is the root cause of around a lot of these things? And how do you think that we can help break that perception, particularly in academia as well?
You know, I don't know that there's any one thing that ever fixes these things, right? Like, this is what we're always hoping for, is some silver bullet. You like, oh, let's just teach women to negotiate better. Let's just teach women to do this or do that. Let's do these different things. I don't know that there's a single answer. I do think academia in particular just takes a long time to change. We are a very slow moving industry. There's actually a great book out right now called Whatever It Is, I'm Against It. It's about change in higher ed. And I'm like, yeah, that's us. We are in so many ways the engines of innovation in our states, but then as organizations, we are incredibly conservative and sort of slow moving and so on. But I have some hope. The pipeline is part of it. It is the case that there are so many more women with PhDs now. And if you go down a level, so I gave you sort of scary stats about the presidencies, but if you go down a level to provosts, it's something like almost 40% of the provosts at these top universities are women. So there is a pipeline of people that could be lifted up. And then the question is, how do we get there? It's probably the regents and the trustees and, the people surrounding universities who need to start to care about this issue and find, candidates who might look different or behave differently than what they're used to, but that they think could do a good job of running the institution. And the next 10 years or so of higher ed is going to be really interesting. We're looking at enrollment cliffs where we just don't have a lot of high school kids right now in America. So there's going to be shrinking and there's going to be changes. And a lot of disciplines are sort of changing over, and we're trying to figure out what AI means in all this. And, so it's a moment where I think we could make some real changes, but people are going to have to make systemic change. It's not an easy answer.
No, 100%. And one of the reasons why I'm super excited about partnering with UCI is I know that about 70% of your student population are first generation. And I think there's something really special around that, just being an immigrant as well, and knowing that there's a very special struggle around that. And so many people who are really close and dear to me have those stories, and they went to UCI and graduated, and have been really super successful. My partner in particular, right, was first generation, parents got divorced, and, was 16 when he went to UCI on a scholarship and had graduated, and now is, a managing director at a big financial services company. And I would never hear of any of those kinds of stories had they not have this gone through UCI. And there's just really something special about the support that's within UCI and the system and the faculty, which excites me because that's exactly kind of the population as well. Very special side of the population that doesn't usually get the opportunities, but also has that, who struggle in just even getting their foot in the door in anything. Yeah. And I think that's really what's so special to me about UCI and just partnership and just being able to give back. But talk to me a little bit about that. What is that special sauce that's there? I've been around it a little bit, and it's just it's amazing energy that's just even just being on campus and around the community there. But maybe you can articulate a little bit of what that special sauce is, because I haven't seen that kind of community and that kind of rallying around a population that really feels that they're welcome and invited and able to dream and thrive.
Yeah. Well, depending on if I'm in a good mood or a bad mood, I say the following things about Irvine. I say we are the Goldilocks campus, which is the good mood version. And sometimes I say Irvine is beige, which is the bad mood version. But what I mean by both of those things is we sit right in the middle. So the UC system has 10 campuses, some that are really, really old. They've been here since almost the founding of the state, and some that are really, really new. There are some that are really, really big and some that are pretty small still. They're, all different kinds of ways. And we are right in the middle on basically every metric that you can come up with. And as weird as that sounds, I think that puts us in a really special position because we have the sort of quality and authority of a major research university that has a medical school and has a law school and has all the things. But we're young and agile still. We're only, a little over 60 years old. And so we don't have quite the baggage that you might have if you're an older university. And we do have an enormous number of first gen students. And what's really remarkable is both our provost and our chancellor. So the top two academic leaders on our campus are both first gen themselves. And I don't want to say that's unique. I'm sure that's true somewhere else, but I can't name another place in which that's true. And so they bring to every meeting and every discussion a thought of what it is like to strive, to be unknown and sort of confusing to your family. Our provost tells this amazing, beautiful story about when his parents were going on a trip once and they were leaving his siblings in charge of him. And, back then you didn't have phones, you didn't have whatever. So you're sort of prepping like, oh my gosh, bad things could happen. And they said, listen, if anything happens and you're now in charge of your little brother, he gets to go to as much school as he wants. He can go to school forever, because they knew that school was like a way up and to do these other things and that he had those capabilities, but they didn't know anything else about it. And to think about that versus me, like both my parents had doctorates. I always joke, I'm like the opposite of first gen, whatever that is. That's a really different experience. And so they bring that wisdom of what that's like into our conversations. And so you couple the sort of perfect context of UCI with these amazing leaders that so lift up women. They so lift up underrepresented groups on campus. They so lift up our first gen students. And they made a commitment. Our chancellor, especially a decade ago when he came in, he said, we are going to have very, very high quality and we are going to have access. And those two things are going to exist together. And I will not allow us to imagine that they can't coexist. And that kind of vision really makes a difference.
Yeah, that's super awesome. And again, just really excited about that and excited to be part of that and being able to give back in some way. So let's shift gears a little bit. So one of the things that I love about us is that we're part of this like really cool, like my SoCal Council of Queens. So that's really it. It's like, since I'm the new transplant to SoCal, it's like, yeah, there's this really cool SoCal Council of Queens that we've all been part of. And it just, again, one of the things that I just loved about our friendship, like no questions asked. It was kind of like, okay, you were going to support me no matter what. And that was just reciprocal from like, even before I sat down with you. And I just want to talk a little bit about that because that seems to be a rare thing of just really finding a network of women that support others. And I'm sure like you've also experienced that within the different ways that you've navigated through your career from both the commercial side and like the academic side. What are kind of like your values around like, wanting to give back and all of those pieces just, that make you want to support other women? But ask that question for you.
That's a big one. I mean, one of the quotes that I have loved since I can remember like doodling this on my notebooks in middle school is, a candle loses nothing of its light by lighting another candle. And this is just how I've tried to live my life. And I've been so blessed to be surrounded by other people who live their lives that way too. And I know that there's this sort of competition thing especially amongst some women. And I just like, I just can't participate in that. Like if you bring that energy to me, I'm just not a part of it. And, I hate to lose. I really do. I really like to win, but my favorite is when we all win, right? Like I actually don't want anyone to lose. And so like, I just love to surround myself by women who feel that way. And I find that if I do that, whether it's my peers or people above me or people I'm mentoring or whatever, wonderful things keep happening. And they bring more of those amazing women into my life. And you're such a good example of that. I mean, we have a shared friend who just said, you two would be so good together and connect with us.
No, she said you two will be best friends. It wasn't even a choice.
There's no choice. She declared it. And that's just, I say to people a lot, like my life is so full in all of the best ways. And yes, it's exhausting and it's stimulating and it's all the things, but it's just full, and it's full of this wonderful energy of people who are there to help each other. And I just can't, I honestly don't know why anyone would live any other way.
No, it's so true. And I've gotten to know you and the people in your team. You've got some really amazing women in your team who've also adopted me. And your sister also adopted me. It's pretty great. And I think by the time I met you, actually, our common friend, and I think I had been traveling so much. I had just moved to California. And I think at that point, I had been here close to a year, but I had spent probably 9 months out of that whole year on the road. And I just finally came back and I was like, okay, this looks familiar. It's supposed to feel like home, but it doesn't feel like home. I'm like, maybe I go back to New York. And she's like, no, you're not going back to New York. She goes, what's missing? And I realized, one of the things that I did when I left New York was sever all my ties from the community. I was always very involved in a board or something. And I was like, hey, I think that's probably what's missing. Like, I've spent most of my life on the road and I need to root down in California and figure out a way to kind of root down and find community and, find my people and find that, that circle that allows me to anchor down. Mm-hmm. So I think so the deal that I made was I'm not going to travel for like 7 or 8 weeks as much as I could do and give myself a chance to acclimate to life at California, which meant a routine and going to the gym. So then I have that community in Equinox and Newport Beach and my spin guys who've been awesome. They were the ones who came in and bought a table and supported me at the LA Times, which is great. And then I had like breakfast with you and you're like, okay, you're not going anywhere. I'm adopting you. It's just been, it's really been kind of just like life-changing for me. To have that support, to have that community. And you're right, to me, it's like, it's what I can give and give back and find ways where we can kind of lift each other. And that's super meaningful for me. And, I don't live my life any other way. So, I'm super grateful for that and just a chance to work with you, at UCI, but also have like our little SoCal Council of Queens, little drinks and side gigs at the same time, because it's important, but I also realize how rare that is, and it just, a lot of women don't have that, and
it's super true. I mean, this one of the things that's been interesting to me as I've sort of grown and matured is my whole life, partly because of the kind of field that I'm in, most of my best friends were all men. I'm totally comfortable and happy hanging with the guys. They've been super supportive of me for the most part. I mean, we all have terrible stories, right? That's what it is to be a woman. But that's been pretty good. But I would say in the last 10 or 15 years is when I've really started to grow those female friendships. And they are generative in a way that I don't know that I expected. I didn't know that. I didn't use the Council of Queens phrasing until I met you. And it's now my new favorite thing. Because I'm like, yes, that is the best description of a group of women who are all here not to compete, but to lift each other up, to fix each other's crowns, to fix each other's dresses. I don't know if you know this. We were just at an event together. And I had somehow torn my dress getting out of the car. So I had like a tiny little rip.
No, and not know that.
Two of the women at our table were like, one was like, oh my God, you have this thing. And the other one went and got me a sewing kit from the front desk. And then they're like blocking me so I can run in the bathroom. And I'm like literally in the bathroom, take my dress off, sewing it up, putting it back on at like a business networking event. And I just thought, only women would do that. Like my guy friends are great and I love them, but they would never tell me because they'd be so uncomfortable. And then even if they did tell me, they wouldn't know what to do. And it's just, the Council of Queens. It's so important.
I love that because like I didn't know about that in your dress, but I remember we recorded a video that you're like, we pointed to one woman in the team that was just like, can you please make sure, like, because you're a woman and you're going to tell me, the guys won't tell me if my hair is off or if I have something. Like, you have to be the honest person to tell us, and I love it. And we're like, okay, camera angles, tall and skinny. Thank you.
Yep, absolutely.
But you're right. Oh my gosh, like the dress thing, like, That just reminded me of Emma and when she had her dress torn when she, I think it was at the Oscars
Yeah.
recently. But you're right. I had this same horrific moment last year when I was at Wimbledon and I was entertaining. Exactly. I was entertaining clients and you know those invisible zippers?
Mhm.
Oh, mine exploded and there was no other way to like fix it. And I had a whole day of entertaining clients and no other alternative. And, you know, because it's Wimbledon. So, like, this woman who is the bathroom attendant saw just how horrified I am, was trying to fix it and couldn't do it. And she was like, hold on a second, gets on the radio. And she says, I'm going to be right back. It might be 10 minutes, but don't go anywhere. I was like, I can't go anywhere. She
Right.
went and grabbed a sewing kit. And suddenly I have her and another woman, an elderly woman, Irish woman, sewing me into my dress.
Amazing.
Amazing. So that I can do this whole thing. And they're like, okay, it's not completely good, but I think you can put your jacket and it looks fine and we'll do this. Like, I love it. But you're right. No other person was going to help you. And at that moment, I was the only woman and everyone else was men. So like, yeah. I was on my own and I was on my own in the bathroom. And they probably wonder why was she in the bathroom for like an hour?
But you got it done, and then you went and took care of business for the rest of the day.
No one knew that I was sewn into the dress and it was torn and I had this wardrobe malfunction.
Yeah.
At all. You know,
Perfect.
so that's perfect. No, that's pretty funny. Yeah, exactly. It's just women helping women, and I love that. I love that aspect of it. One of the things that from like our little SoCal group, right? I'm kind of the single one, but in a committed relationship. I know you guys all have kids, and you know, I talked about this when you were at the LA Times. We're just, you know, it was like, oh, you can't have it all, and I kind of defended the single woman for a little bit, where it's like, hey, it wasn't, you know. It should be okay if it's by choice, but sometimes it's circumstantial and it's not by choice. And for me, it's more circumstantial to not have kids and things like that. And so, you know, but I don't feel like I'm missing anything because I have nieces and nephews that I support. But one of the things that I was told was like, hey, in order for you to be successful in your career, and I think that comes within our generation, you have to choose. You can't have it all. Kids and a family and all stuff, and you've got kids and family. How do you balance that out? And what do you tell other women who are trying to make that climb and were being told to have a choice?
So there's two things I think are really important. The first is I do not believe that work-life balance exists. I do not think that that is a concept that is helpful to anyone. I think that no matter who you are, whether you have kids or not, there are moments in your life where your personal life needs everything you have. You need to take care of a relative. Your kids need something, your parents need something, whatever. There are times it is out of balance and your family needs everything or your friends need everything. You got to race off to take care of a friend who was in an accident or whatever. And I think there are times when your work needs everything that you have. And so there's no concept of balance. Like life is chaotic and out of balance. So what I strive for is, can I do the thing that is of the highest need and the highest priority in that moment? And if I feel like I can do that, even if other things suffer in the meantime, then I'm pretty happy with what I have going on. So that's the first thing. And I really try to tell that, especially the young women. They ask me like, how do you balance it all? And I'm like, I don't. Stop telling yourself that you're going to balance it. You're never going to feel like, oh, I've got all the balls in the air. You're going to drop things and you have to be okay with that. The second thing is I just have an amazing support structure around me. And that looks different for different people. I have a good friend I went to grad school with, and her husband and she are both super, super striving, and they have kids, but her parents live nearby and they have the super nanny of all super nannies that they're like, we're adopting her. She's the most amazing person in the world. That's a support structure. Sometimes you pay for it. Sometimes it's parents. Sometimes it's whatever. For me, we moved to California far, far away from any family. And I thought, this is all going to blow up. We're going to have to move back east. I don't know what's going to happen. And about a year ago, we made the decision for my husband to retire and just be with the kids. And I struggled with this more than he did. He was like, this is the right thing to do. Our kids are at an age where it's really important that people be available to them and so on. And I was like, you're going to get bored. You're going to get this, you're going to get that. And he said to me, that is your sexism inherent in you. If I was a woman and you were a man with the kind of job that you have, you wouldn't think twice about this. And that was a really defining moment for me because I was like, he's right. And that's been amazing. Like our kids are so much happier now than they've been in years and so on. But, you know, I don't know how many women have that. I don't know how many women have the option of a partner who's like, yes, I'm going to take care of our kids because that's what's the priority right now. And you go do your career. But I do think that the big jobs, whether it's a big corporate job or a big political job or a big university job, I don't think they're very conducive to both people having big jobs. I don't think that's something that we've figured out yet in society. And so you either really have to build that support structure around you. You got to get your like cleaning person and your personal assistant and your nanny and your whoever, or one person is probably going to have a little bit lesser of a job. I'm not saying they all have to retire like my husband did, but you know, I think that's hard. I don't think we figured that out yet.
I love that. I have a couple of comments. One is like, I love the fact that you said that it was like what was in your head, because like I was such a good wife. Cleaned and like I cooked. Like my first husband would not eat leftovers, so you know there was that challenge. And then when I was traveling, it was even worse. Like I knew that I was coming home to dishes that were piled in the sink instead of in the dishwasher, which is next to the sink. But that was like, you know, I kind of accepted these kind of stereotypes and ideas that was my job as a wife. And then, you know, years later, like, you know, it took me a while to be back in a relationship and I'm just thinking, I'm like, well, you know, I got to pick up the dry cleaning. And suddenly one of my friends like, you're not his mom and you're not his maid. I was like, huh. You know, I was like, you're right. And it just, and he himself is like pretty independent and we're both extremely independent. I just never really thought about it. I just kind of came back to this like autopilot that it's my responsibility. Well, how was that your responsibility? It was never your responsibility to begin with. And like, you're like, oh my gosh, right? Like there are some things that kind of like autopilot. So I love that just, you know, that there are these things that, you know, I think stereotypes that come from the past that, you know, we are uphold against, and it's in our head and we're so unconscious that does exist. The second question I had for you, right? So like, obviously there's a lot of decisions that you've made. There's things about that, you know, a lot of other women that I've known said that they get judged. You're like, you're such a bad mom, or like, you know, how would you do that? Or like the stigma around that. Like, is that something that you've experienced as well? Like, you know, with some of the decisions you've made, or like if you're, you know, you're right, life work balance, things happen. I hear that a lot from a lot of working moms. Where like, okay, you know, if you didn't make the ballet recital or something like that, oh, that's a terrible parent. Like, have you dealt with that, and how do you kind of, you know, think through that?
Yeah, I think there's judgment on both ends. And I think we self-judge a lot, right? Like a lot of it is just negative self-talk. I remember just being so torn apart because I needed to be in Scotland for a conference where I was getting a big award. And it was my kid's first like children's theater play. Now, this particular child has since been in a million plays, and the idea that I was agonizing over this now feels ridiculous. But I was like so upset that I couldn't do both. And to be fair, the theater people worked their way around. They said, you can come to the final dress rehearsal. They were so sweet about it. And the conference people made it so that they moved my talk so that I could be at the end of the conference. So everyone around me was actually in that case doing everything they could to help me. And it was entirely my own self-judgment. So we have to learn to give ourselves a break and stop feeling like I've got to be the one to do the dishes and I've got to be the one to pick up the dry cleaning and I've got to be the one to be at every event. But there is also this sort of weird war. You know, I'm in a community where I would say maybe half the women work and about half are with their kids full time. And there is definitely a divide. Like, you know, I was talking to another one of the working moms from my school, and she was like, yeah, the PTA is not for us. Like, we're the ones who are supposed to go and do these things, but that's not for us, you know, and she was being sort of funny about it. And in some ways, like, it helped to relieve my own stress about it. But you do realize like those moms this is their thing. And a lot of them were super successful in the workplace before they decided to stop working. So I think that they are often bringing all that corporate energy into their PTA-ness, and they are going to do this and do it well. And so great. I'm glad they're there. They're keeping my kids' school running. But it is this sort of weird divide that doesn't need to exist. And yet it's still there. And we do kind of, as women, often put up these boundaries that don't need to be there and judge each other in ways that we don't need to. We can just, I'm grateful for those women and I'm happy that they are running the school and try to be generous and pleased instead of competitive.
Yeah, no, I cook really well, but it's hard to cook for one person, but I'm really great at making reservations.
And that is a skill. Making a reservation at the right place at the right time is a skill.
That is a skill. And I told that it's also a skill to know that if you know someone at a restaurant and one of the hardest places to book a reservation and you never have to go through that, like that is also a skill. That is something that I do have. So I was told that Javier's is one of the hardest places to ever get a table in Newport. And so I have an inn, so I never ever have a problem to do that, but that is a skill.
That is absolutely a skill. Yes.
And it's not just in everyone's life, it's not just Newport Beach. Any country you go to, you have like a speed dial. I was like, yes, like I do.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, it's kind of like the judgment. And yeah, you're right. You're not going to have me like with the perfect cupcakes and things like that. I can't do it, but I'm really great at making reservations and ordering. So
we all have to own our own skills and talents.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't think I've ever felt as bad about myself as when trying to decide between cloth and paper diapers. I mean, the fact that is this like dramatic thing in mom world. And it's also silly. None of it matters.
It just, yeah, no, it doesn't matter. But it's also funny though, like sometimes in corporate America, how those stereotypes kind of fall into you. It's kind of like when there's a meeting and it's like, it's always the women who takes care of the ordering. It's like that. It's never the men. Like the catering order, all the logistics, it's, but I think that's also what's so special about as women, we kind of come into those situations is that we do pay attention to the details. We do think about all these things that change the dynamic of a meeting or for a corporate setting that provides some of that nurture. And I think that's an important piece of what we bring to the table.
Yeah, absolutely.
I don't know. I think those are kind of all the questions I've had. I don't know if you have any questions for me or did we cover everything?
I mean, I feel like we covered everything and you probably talked about this on your podcast somewhere else, but I just want to commend you. And maybe if you want to comment on this at all, look, words and writing is my business. Like that's what professors really do. Whatever else you think that we do, pushing out a lot of words is the primary thing that we do. And I have never seen someone write a book as fast as you did. And so I guess one of the things I get asked a lot by our graduate students, right, is like, I'm stuck. How do I get this next paper out? How do I get my dissertation out? Whatever. How did you take like this burning passion in your heart and get it on page?
Oh my gosh. So the first 3 chapters I sat on for a year and I didn't know which direction was. And then I got sick. This is truly the story. And you know this, between Christmas and, the 10th of January, I was so sick. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't lie down. There was no asthma medication that could help relieve me because they were all in back order in the state of California across the United States. So like there was just no sleeping. And I just started writing. And my brother knew that I've always wanted to finish this book. And his whole thing, just do it. Just keep writing. And I think it was like, and people ask me like, oh, what's the secret sauce? Like, just do it. Like, cause that was what my brother told me. And I just kept writing and writing and writing and writing. And he was just like, just get into it. And I think I just got into a groove and like and the story is like our common friend, I just kept sending her these pages. They were all she was the first draft reader for everything. So, and she's just like, she goes, I don't know what you're on right now, but like whatever's coming out is so good. And then I would do the first draft pages with her and then I would send it to my brother. My brother would edit it down and I just kept going. And the next thing I know, like, she's like, okay, this is awesome. You need to publish this now. And I'm still sick and coughing and I'm talking to publishers. So 25th to the 10th of January, the 12th of January, I signed with a publisher. And I still had one more chapter that I was still finishing when I signed on with a publisher. And he was like, okay, you have like a week before we get this in final draft so we can do this. And he was like, oh yeah, this needs to come out during International Women's Day. I'm like, that's March 8th. Like then I started the marketer and we started backing up to a marketing plan and I like started panicking. But it was fast, but I got into a groove and I think it was just do it. And my brother was such a great support because he's such a great editor and just did it. And honestly, when the book changed a lot from the first draft a little bit. There was a lot of like really good editing. Lila, she particularly looked at like I think chapter 8. There was a lot of emotion there. There's like a love letter at the back of chapter 8. She goes, yeah. Tell him I got his love letter that I read the first draft, and he got the edited version. It's like, yeah, I will do that because it was definitely a lot more less emotional and a little bit more polished. But yeah, that was I just had some really good support with my brother, who's just a brilliant writer and was able to really take that edit. But it was also a trust thing. Like you have to trust someone with your voice to trust someone to know that they can edit, because a lot of what was also coming up was super vulnerable. Probably not the same in academic writing, but like having someone you trust to be able to look at that and get that feedback really accelerates that process for you too. And I think that that's super important. And that was my brother for me. But by the time like it went into the publishing editing process, they barely touched the book. They're like, this is publish ready. Which was also shocking to me. I was like, oh, wow. Even though that he did edit it, like, yeah, the words like kind of came in from me to really kind of help that. And it was just kind of nuts. But yeah, I don't know what I was on. I wrote something that fast, but I write fast, but I think it's just a matter of getting it done, because like even in academia, I know that it's like publish or perish and you have to push words. But in consulting, nothing's real unless it's on paper.
Yeah.
Nothing's real unless it's on paper. And so I'm constantly producing thought leadership and POVs and white papers and things like that. And so that whole notion of writing has always been one of my hallmarks as, being a really good writer. But granted, writing a book versus writing something like a commercial white paper around AI or tech is two very different kind of languages, but it's the same kind of process. So yeah. I know, just get it done. To all the PhD students that are there, just do it.
Just get it done. I love it. I watch Netflix when I'm sick, but you write a book. So to each his own.
Netflix and HBO and Disney Plus and everything else. I ran out. There was nothing else to watch. I was not entertained. And I just grabbed my laptop and I just, pounded away. So, but
I love it. So everyone needs to get whatever cold medicine you're on, a really great first reader and editor, and just the stamina to just decide we're just going to push words out. It's amazing.
Yeah, just do it. I mean, I think you guys get that too. And so I think there's also part of it is the creative process. I mean, I'm a creative at heart. So sometimes when it just sparks you, it's there. Because I sat on it for a year and I didn't know directly where it was going to go. And I had a really strong concept in my head about what I wanted to book. And what I initially thought of and what came out are two different things. And so, and I think part of it is that there's a story there about the life that I had to live in order to get to that moment to be able to write this. And I think I was writing for something within a moment. And also just being able to get to the place of like, okay, honestly, like the whole book for me is courage to be able to bring out that vulnerability. And really be able to talk about that, and not just my life, but what I've observed. But so much of it is me. And I think most people who write a book, it's usually like 6 months to a year before it publishes or something like that. Especially if it's like an autobiography. Mine is not. It really was within that moment. So like I would say the thoughts in the last chapter, are so much of it is the reality of the life that I'm living at this moment.
Yeah.
Which is also crazy because like when I'm talking about this and, there is that vulnerability part of it. And it's like, this is season 2 of the podcast. The first season, I'm like, you see me giggling because I'm nervous, around the courage and the vulnerability that was going to go out. And now that it's out there, I'm a little bit more comfortable with it, but it is a little bit of that. It is the reality of me and what I put out there. But to your point, I don't know how to live my life, not as authentically and unapologetic as I am. And I think that that's kind of where I am in my phase. It's like, I'm not going to apologize for who I am. I'm going to live within my truth and bring my authentic self. And I think that comes with maturity and, gravitas to be able to step in and really, be in your skin and And I hope people take, you know, some sort of inspiration around that, because I think you and I both know that the success that we've had has just really been about us following our heart and our passion, and, you know, just kind of geeking out and not caring. So, you know, but yeah.
I love that. I mean, I tell my kids all the time, courage is not about not being afraid. Courage is about being afraid and doing it anyway. And that is where the vulnerability, the striving for, you know, bigger and better things and bigger and better jobs in a different world and a different life that we can all have comes in. And I just value that so much in your story, just the courage that you show and you keep showing by making a podcast, by writing a book, by starting a new company, all of these amazing things.
Yeah, no, I think I wrote that in the book, right? Because like, there was definitely a pivoting point, right, from the story where I said, you know, the word courage comes from the French word cœur, which means heart. And to have courage is to actually walk in with your heart. And so I think that was really kind of where it is. And so I just, you know, for me, it's like, okay, you know, let's march forward and kind of bring the vulnerability of your heart in front. So, but yeah, no, so happy to, it's always fun to hang out with you. So, you know, oh yeah, that was the other thing. Like, I love that you just embraced your inner geek. And so obviously I'm a woman in tech. For the longest time, I started in marketing, and I was always very techie, and I always, thank God, grew up around tech. Like, we were one of the first homes in the Philippines that had an IBM personal computer, and then also had a Mac. So that was a big deal. So like, I knew how to code in DOS. I, you know, played around with that, and that's probably what made me really comfortable with tech. And I never really talked about it. And for a portion of my career as a marketer, I was like, shh, don't tell them how geeky I am.
Yeah. Don't let people know the geeky part. Yeah.
Like, they're like, wait, like, she really can talk about tech. Like, I was like, I kind of embrace all of that stuff. And it's, I think to me, it's like, I was like, there is also that metamorphosis for me where it's like, yeah, I didn't talk about it. And now I'm just like, yeah, I'm totally embracing it. And the same thing as you, they're like, wait, she's a tech person with personality. And I'm like, yeah, and I'm a total geek.
This is the beautiful thing about this moment we have going on with AI right now. I used to tease people. I'm like, the fastest way to get someone to walk away from me at a cocktail party was to be like, yes, I'm a computer scientist. And they're like, okay, bye. And now they're like, oh, let's talk about AI. So, you know, we're having a moment. We can be cool. Girls in tech, we're here for it.
I hear you. No, yeah, it's like, it's kind of funny. Like, people now just like phone me and like, they're like, can we talk about data and tech and AI? I was like, sure.
Yes, we can.
Yes, we can. So, well, thank you so much again for your time and for jumping on my podcast, and really excited about all the wonderful things that you and I are going to do and the empires that you and I are going to build.
Absolutely.
So, but thank you. Thank you for listening to my podcast. I hope this has inspired you to continue the fight for equality, challenge stereotypes, and lift as we climb. We'd love to hear from you. Amplify the conversation on social media, following @DuquesseCD. For more information about me and my Amazon best-selling book, Walking in My Shoes, Shattering Glass Ceilings in Corporate America, check out DuquesseCD.com.